yeah, I guess for now, I'll leave it over to Julian. Thanks, Julian.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, I've done a talk in Sydney before, a couple of years ago through Evolver Sydney. So this is the second talk, or it's just been me talking, and it's always very humbling to give a talk and people have come out of their way just to see you say some stuff. And even though I very much enjoy my own writing and listening to my own talks, I'm really glad other people do too. So this talk is about pretty much what I always talk about. It's the aspect of mindset in set and setting, and the mindset is the set and the intention upon which everything rests. But deeper than your mindset is where you rest, and your intention and your attitude and your philosophy and many aspects such as the state of your physical health, your relationships, what's going on in your life, what you are aiming to get out of taking psychedelics and psychoactive plants, and all these many varying facets. So I want to try and cover many of these facets. There's so many, I don't think I'll be able to get into all of them, and I'll be kind of straying a bit into metaphysical conjecture and interpretation. Recently, I've been filming a documentary about psychedelics in Australia, and I've been filming a lot of people who've been going very deep with psychedelics and who have a lot of wisdom to share. And I'm finding many different threads are the same. Many people are saying similar sort of things. And many of these people, most of them don't know each other, haven't talked to one another. But there's when you go deep, when you repeatedly go into this space, there is a kind of a wisdom, though wisdom might be a bit of a highfalutin word, perhaps an understanding that you gain from going really deep and really understanding. I'm just like, did I turn that on? Is that red thing on? Yeah, I'm paranoid. It should show a red light. So yeah, I've been finding a great similarity in what people have been saying, because I think in the psychedelic state, in so much as culture and the law and Big Brother says you're going to find yourself in a distorted consciousness, a hallucinogenic state that's removed from reality. My experience is, if approached with respect and having a proper foundation and carrying it out correctly, the result is that you come more into a sense of your own intelligence and your own wisdom and your own understanding, and able to interpret reality in such a way that you have more of a perhaps humane, compassionate, aware, conscious understanding of yourself and others and the world around you, so that you can act as a human being in a more effective way. And I'm not just talking about, making heaps of money or becoming famous. I'm more talking about, becoming human in the sense of connecting more deeply to the essence of what it is to grow, what it is to live, what it is to experience, what it is to be human and take advantage of the human circumstance. Whatever you think about that, and whatever you think that human circumstance is, I do believe that there can be a furthering and expansion, and one can really go more deeply into what the human experience can offer by utilising these tools. So, there are a lot of people talk a lot about preparation, for example, but in essence, I think preparation is something that you start with. It's almost like you need to be prepared from the get-go, and you need to have some understanding of where you're going and why you're going there and what your intention is and what you hope to be the result. And there are a lot of different viewpoints on what a desired result is and what a desired intention is and what the result will be. Many different religions, for example, they have their own versions of what a desired result is. For example, in Buddhism, it might be attaining nirvana or becoming enlightened. In Christianity, it might be going to heaven. And some more esoteric religions, it might be to harm no living animals, for example. So there's many different kind of results or ideas that say religions or philosophies have about what the desired result is. And I'm going to talk about that to some degree as well. And I think, especially when it comes to psychedelics, and I'm more inclined towards taking plants than synthetic compounds, what I experience happening and what the thousands of people I've talked to about it experience is they experience very often a plant sentience or the plant teacher communicating with them. And this is a very fundamental core idea at the basis of, for example, Amazonian shamanism, where they are often attempting not just to talk to ayahuasca, but to communicate to many different other plants as well, and diet with these plants and take tinctures with them and attempt to open up these channels of communication, because they see that the plant has an intelligent consciousness. Now, that the plant can communicate with you is one thing, and the plants can tell you different things, whether in images or telepathically, or maybe even in feelings. But it appears to be very much an internal experience, whereby people feel guided by the plants. There's a sense that the plants are, in some sense, aligned with the deeper aspects of reality and perhaps the earth. They don't have a conscious mind that can lead them astray into too much thinking or overthinking. The plants don't have any religion, for example. They just are. They're quite, to my mind, instinctual. So I'm not going to go into the mechanisms of how plants are sentient and different people's views. That's all stuff that you can research yourself and look into. But the fact is, it's very common for people to experience the plants communicating to people about their life, giving them advice, and helping them to essentially be a better person. And why are the plants doing this? Well, I suppose the way they see it is that we are the dominant life form who has, pretty much destroyed all of the native forest which most of the plants survive in. And I think they want to help us to become conscious, become aware, become caring, become not just, ravenous ghosts just consuming everything in sight. I think they want us to wake up, to take care of reality. I do believe they recognize they have a place in their consciousness where they recognize we are all part of Gaia. And again, this is the common experience that many people experience, that, okay, we're all connected. Earth is a living organism. We're all part of it. This is reality. What are we doing to ourselves? What are we doing to the planet? What are we doing to each other? So I think perhaps rather than having these ideas about, where we're going, how we're going to get there, perhaps it's often better to have a foundation or approach which is curious, which is questioning, rather than coming at it with a full mind of teachings and ideas and what Guruji says and what Osho says and what David Deida says and all these ideas and all these mental forms. I think, in my view, I think it's better to come into the space with a receptive consciousness, with a listening mind, an open mind that listens and doesn't come at it with the preconception of, okay, this is what's occurring, this is how it's occurring. And I think often it is the case, if you try and determine an outcome, you may be limiting what's happening for you, and perhaps to some degree setting any intentions very positive, but we don't always know what may be good for us. Or it's the old Donald Rumsfeld thing, we don't know what we don't know. So I think that even though it's useful to have an intention, perhaps it's more useful to simply be receptive. And in that space, okay, what can, especially these plants, what can they do for us? And I think it's useful to keep in mind that it is well recognized by many people that the plants are not just teachers, they're not just communicating to us, whether those communications are as simple as geometric patterns of color, pure mathematics, pure color, the machine code of creation even. Wherever that's coming from, that's pure information, that's pure teaching. Whether it's that or more specific information about, how you might be being a bit of a bastard, or generally I find that the plants will tell people, look, why are you acting in this way? They're the ones who are provoking the questioning. They're the ones who are allowing people to see their own behavior, their own actions in a field which is not human. So it's less judgmental than a therapist. And I think this therapeutic space, the plants, they know what's going on with you. You can't hide from them. So that space is one in which you need to be receptive. You need to be open to that another living organism kind of knows everything about you, like Santa Claus or God, or and really, I think when you accept that, it makes things a lot easier because there's no sense of judgment there. The plants are not, I think the negative aspect of judgment is when it's coming from an agenda, when it's coming from a distorted perspective, when it's coming from projection. But when the plants tell you that you're being a bit of a bastard, they don't have an agenda. They don't have any projection. They're just saying, look, just think you're being a bit of a bastard here. Take it or leave it. And, and I think because it is a plant, you can accept it. You can look at it and go, oh yeah, maybe I have been a bit of a bastard. Oh, why is that? And the plants, and you ask that question, why am I being a bit of a bastard? The plants will say, well, check this out. This is what we think, and you can sort of go into an inquiry, Even if you are of the mind, well, the plant spirits are just your own mind, it's a hallucination. It's a fantastic process to go into, a self-dialogue. So, this is the kind of space that is available to us. And it again comes back to the question, why do we want to do this? Why do we want to take psychedelics? And Jeff introduced me as a psychonaut, and I don't really accept that label because it's a little bit of It's not such a great label. I'm sort of going to talk about the psychonaut. I think the psychonaut is one stage of experience, and this is a bit like an initial level. I think you kind of start sniffing out what's really happening, and it's startling, it's astounding, it's amazing. You can be highly inspired by it and have these incredible experiences. But I think that, the psychonaut is an explorer, sure, but the psychonaut doesn't actually necessarily do much else but explore. And I think that when you go deeper, there's a certain kind of work that you start doing on yourself. And that happens naturally when people mention psychonaut. The word doesn't imply someone who is engaging with their own fear, engaging into the unknown of themselves, and really facing the truth about themselves and going into this kind of more mature apprehension of who they are as a human being. And that's deep stuff. It's hard, deep stuff. And there's a lot of people in our society, a lot of people even in the psychedelic world, who have great resistance, great fear to going into what's actually going on for them. So for those of us who do take the plunge, give yourself a pat on the back, because there's a hell of a lot of people who are not taking that plunge and not doing the work and not actually having a hard look at themselves and seeing those hard truths about oneself that it's not really so easy to wiggle out of. It can be, there's that sort of terrifying edge of reality and that confrontation with reality, which I think many people are avoiding. And I think many people feel that they're scared of so many things. Of course they are. They're scared of the unknown, they're scared of change, and they're scared of changing their belief systems, They're scared they're going to look like a tie-dyed hippie, It's like so many potential fears that people have about taking psychedelics. But I think it's worth it. It's really worth it. And there are results, and I suppose I'll get into that and many things more deeply. But I met a man recently who felt that he would be judged. He felt that he had perhaps, I didn't inquire too much, done things that perhaps society or other people will consider unsavory or bad. Don't know. But I got the impression that he felt that he would be judged. But I don't think the plants judge us in the way that human beings do. They just say, look, this is how things are. This is what's going on. This is what it looks like from this angle, from that person. This is what it looks like in the future. I know a guy who he had an experience of taking iboga, and the iboga told him, this is what your life is going to look like in future lifetimes if you continue these unconscious behaviors. And he told me the experience shocked him so much he wasn't able to speak for 2 weeks. But the iboga's just, from its perspective, just seeing it how it is. It's not even tough love. It's not hitting you over the head and saying, wake up. It's not causing him pain. It's not hitting him over the head with a 4x2 saying, wake up. It's saying, if you choose to remain unconsciousness, these are the consequences that I see. So I think, it's not necessarily easy to accept and see these hard truths. So I think that psychedelics can be approached from the perspective of wanting to fix a problem, whether it's the typical ones, the epidemics of our society, of anxiety and depression, and generally just not feeling particularly enthusiastic about life and about living and about working and about anything, the kind of TV zombie mode. And I think that psychedelics can be a brilliant remedy for countering that. But there are many negatives, I feel. There are many downsides. In the interviews I've been giving, I've been finding people don't want to talk or really go into those negative aspects too much. I think that the terrain can be terrifying. It can give you PTSD. It can be frightening. You can see a lot more than you feel you were ready for. I was on the Feed TV program on SBS, and they asked me, can ayahuasca be dangerous? And I said, yes, I think it can be dangerous. People can be catapulted into states that they do not feel that they were ready for. And that process can take months. This is not something that many people want to talk about. And it may render you incapable of working. You may just be too spacey. It may require you to just sit still and look at your own life, look at your own emotions. Because it's very common for people, say, to drink ayahuasca and they've been living their drone robot life, and then they realize, or their organism wants to tell them, hey buddy, why don't you have a look at what's going on in reality more than just your problem-solving mind? What about feeling these emotions of alienation and loneliness, anger, whatever it may be? And that's intense, and there's a big fear there. I think that's innate fear that many of us have, of being somehow rendered unable to deal with reality, because psychedelics will often take you out of a practical framework in which you're able to deal with reality, and which you're having to deal with other realities. You're having to deal with emotional realities, mental realities, which are like not going to allow you to escape the predator as easily perhaps as the people who are just focusing on the meat space. So I think that's all valid. But I do think that to become a rounded, holistic human being who embraces all the dimensions of existence, it's necessary to be more than a machine that thinks. Or maybe the machine doesn't even think. It just functions. It just works. It just pays its tax and insurance and, goes about its business. And the other confronting thing is, and this is what happened in the 60s, people took LSD and they're like, I don't want to work in my dad's accounting firm. I don't want to, do the rat race 9-to-5 thing. They're like, how am I going to create an existence based upon what I've understood as a potential in this world? And somehow I think, possibly collectively, we've moved past that. And people actually, I think there's a sense in the psychedelic world that wait on, it's not so possible to go live in the ashram anymore or go and drop out. It seems less viable. I meet very few people who actually do that. I think that there's a calling upon us to actually do something meaningful in the world and not just be like dope smoking, dirty, filthy hippie. And I think it's important to create meaning in the world. You could say, some people might say life is meaningless, but I think it's important to create meaning, some meaning. Otherwise, what's the point? It's like listening to Jordan Peterson on Joe Rogan the other day, and he was saying, what is it that you can do that's going to make the suffering that you find in your life worthwhile? That you can actually, live and deal with life's slings and arrows, so that actually everything is worthwhile. So I guess I've talked about taking psychedelics to treat remedial problems and the approach of the psychonaut. I think my approach and the approach of many other people I know is based upon becoming more mature and aware and conscious as a human being. And that approach is not to reach a higher state or get high all the time or necessarily reach any state, but perhaps more to just work with what's on one's plate. And there are people who don't want to work with what's on their own plate. There is a word for such people or their tendency, and it's called spiritual bypassing. And that means that they would rather be spiritual and assume a spiritual identity and talk fluffy, lovely sounding words, but when it comes down to the crunch, they're not actually living in a state which is in integrity, in so much as the reality of the mind, behavior, emotions, conduct is not aligned. It's more a sense of escapism. It's bypassing reality into perhaps illusion, ambition, ego, and fantasy, all that stuff. And that's common enough. You encounter that fairly often. I mean, I got involved in the quote-unquote spiritual world when I was 18. You see a lot of people who, kind of, okay, everything looks okay, but there's just a sense of, okay, are these people grounded? Are they real? Are they being real about what they're thinking and they're feeling? And are they trying to present a very positive mask? Are they trying to, where are they really coming from? Have they really investigated themselves? Maybe they're just doing what Guruji tells them to do, or they're, seeking enlightenment, but there's so many things in their life that may be obviously not quite right. So I think, like I said before, it's not easy to look at what is not quite right. That is why psychedelics are the opposite of taking recreational drugs. That's why they're the opposite of taking psychedelics recreationally, because it's actually deeply looking at oneself and seeing what's there and hopefully being able to address it somehow, and hopefully being able to see what it is and hopefully change it, make some changes. And I want to talk about that, how that's possible. So I think a lot of how I found to be one of the most constructive ways to approach or have this foundation for this work is really the idea or the practice of working on oneself. And I actually couldn't tell you where this terminology began when people first began using it in the West. Maybe it started with I think he was Armenian, the Armenian mystic Gurdjieff, who talked about working on oneself. And Gurdjieff's work is a little bit esoteric, if not very esoteric. Perhaps working on oneself came to really become more prominent in the 1970s in the human potential movement. I couldn't tell you, but this terminology is something that it's around, and of course there are people really working on themselves. There are people doing the work, and there are people having a look at what's there and looking into their mind, looking into the emotions, looking at the obstructions in themselves, the blockages in themselves. And that can be also on a physical level as well. That can be something very much on a physical level. And I suppose what we call the physical level is the foundation for everything that we do. And so how we treat the physical is of great importance. And there's many things we can do on a physical level that really do help. And I do think we live in a time where more and more people are waking up, and more people are actually taking care of themselves and realizing that they can feel a lot better, that they can actually live in a way which is more, less jagged, more smooth, more able to deal with what they're experiencing in their lives. A lot of people might not know, for example, that Hatha Yoga was developed originally for people who were going to start meditating, because the yogic practices, the postures are there to allow the body to prepare to integrate the energies of meditation, and not just like meditation, which is, just rolling off a mantra and stilling the mind. No, they're talking about meditation, which is really engaging with the energy body. They're talking about meditation, which is really engaging with the core of the self, and really interacting with the nature and structure of the energy body. And this is something that comes from the East. The people would take this work very seriously. That back in the day, even up until recently, and maybe even still now, I'm not sure, in the Eastern spirituality, someone who was sincerely wanting to be a spiritual person and realize what spirituality was in essence, they would, for example, it's a little bit structured towards the man, but women, of course, would do it as well. And the man would become a householder, for example. That might be one path. that he would get married, perhaps run a business or be a farmer or run a shop or work a job and raise a family. And after that was done, he would then go into the woods or into the cave and start meditating and focus himself on spiritual pursuits and the nature of his own soul. And of course, there's much to be said about the Eastern tendency, particularly those approaches coming from India, whereby men will abnegate the physical world for the non-physical world. And I'm aware that the British were very critical of the Indians, who said that often their best and brightest didn't want to be involved in transforming the world, being in the world, that their intention was more related to their following their spiritual practices. So I'm not necessarily of the mind either that following an exclusively internal path is necessarily healthy. I think that this view that the external world is somehow sinful and don't worry about that and it's all inside, personally I think it's all useful, it's all valuable, and you can gain a lot from engaging in that process of interacting with the inner and the outer. I think probably in our culture, what's missing is we don't necessarily have that internal awareness or consciousness. And so I do believe that not just psychedelics, but there are many other techniques that can be utilized in order to really make contact with the soul. You know, and growing up in Australia, it's not that people are talking about the soul. It's like a place where people don't even believe it exists. It's so elusive. It's not. It's not something that's generally talked about that much. Perhaps increasingly so, because people are frustrated by their existence and this nihilism. So I do think that there are many techniques and methods which are useful for just engaging with the self, engaging with the nature of yourself as a human. I myself find long float tank sessions really helpful, like 2 hours, 3 hours. In that place, there's only you. There's just you. The body ceases to exist. It's just the essence of what you are. Something very, very therapeutic happens at about the hour 45-minute mark. Because there's no stimulation coming in. It's just you experiencing the contents of your own psyche and your own being. And in that place, you can work with it. You can choose to engage more deeply with the essence of what you are, which is not necessarily to be found in the realm of the senses. It's not necessarily to be found in the mind. It's deeper than that. And in the float tank, you can find that frequency. You can tune your radio and find that frequency. Of course, you can do the same in meditation. You know, it's possible. But having said all that, there are so many techniques that can be used. One thing that I didn't mention before, related to the physical body, I think is just clearing out the physical body, like enabling the physical body to become a pure vessel. And we live in a culture where there are so many impurities in the environment, where there are so many chemicals we're taking into our bodies. There's so many crazy frequencies going through the air. It's a it's a minefield out there. I feel I've got to take something like 1 gram of mushrooms or cactus, often once a week, just to keep my head above water in this country. And I don't feel like that in other countries. I feel all right, you know. I don't know what it is exactly. I'm asking myself a lot. But a lot of the time in this country, I just feel like, hey, this is compulsory for me to feel okay and keep my head above water and functioning properly, that, you know, I take something like cactus or mushrooms, just a little bit, it will do the job. That will align my system, it will clear me out. But, you know, again, I think that to have a proper foundation, it's not just, I don't think you can just be relying on the plants to do everything for you. A lot of people, for example, they started their awakening by taking ayahuasca, and maybe they just stick with ayahuasca. But for me, you know, my awakening began with, you know, reading lots of different spiritual books, starting to question everything around me. You know, doing processes like juice fasting, for example, even colonics, something like that. It's considered sort of ineffectual. Colonics is not ineffectual. It's very, very powerful. Say you're putting water into your colon and it does something very powerful. There's a very interesting book called the Assyrian Gospel of Peace, where they are saying that no, John the Baptist wasn't just pouring water over Jesus' head. And it's quite interesting. If you have a good colonic, it can be akin to a spiritual experience. So that is some kind of profound clearing and cleansing that's going on with a good colonic. I have known people who've been very into colonics. They've been almost, you know, fanatical about colonics. It's not a real sexy thing, you know, apart from a very small niche in the online porn market. But it is very powerful. And say combining something like juice fasting with colonics, it's like, okay, if you go on a 10-day juice fast and say you take psyllium husks and you take bentonite clay, which is actually pushing out toxins from your colon and absorbing, the bentonite clay will literally absorb all these chemicals that are in your body that your body may not be able to process. You know, so-called skeptics will say, well, you don't need to cleanse and detox. Your body should be doing it automatically. It's like, yeah, it does its best, but we're exposed to tens of thousands of chemicals. So many chemicals and things, influences, that I think it's important to, in a 19th century terminology, like purify the vessel. You know, purify the self. Before I got into psychedelics, that's what it was about for me. It was about purifying my vessel, who I was, on a physical level, on a mental level, on an emotional level. So I look at what I was thinking. Why am I thinking that? What's going on there? Is that really helpful way to think? Why am I feeling what I'm feeling? You know, having these questions, looking at adjusting yourself into a sense of alignment with, you know, the truth is not the right word, but, you know, having in a sense of, it's not even alignment. Perhaps it's a sense of seeing what's not working and just letting it go, you know. In a sense, I think there's a great deal of value in letting the mind be empty, you know, seeing where these emotional triggers are coming from, and then hopefully it might take a long time. It's just letting them go so that it happens. Some people drink ayahuasca and suddenly they're not angry anymore. They don't get triggered. It happens. But, that process of self-observation, if you really understand and you really comprehend yourself and why you're doing what you're doing, that's often enough. And then there's a level of intention. That's what I was, especially when in my early 20s. I was purifying my level of intention. Why am I doing what I'm doing? What would be the right intention to do anything? In our society, it's capitalistic consumerism is basically just, grabbing you by the balls and exploiting your most basic primordial fears and instincts and making you do stupid stuff that you really don't want to do, that's not going to give you anything useful, beneficial, just for your little ratty consumeristic self. It's not about that. It's not about that. It's actually about expressing. It's about creating. It's about being. It's about the flowering of your soul. And that's another part of it. It's about, it really can be. It doesn't have to be. But there's great value in expression, in art, in singing, in dancing, in coming back to whatever impulse is pure in oneself and putting that forward, whatever is true, whatever is resonant, whatever is real, and coming back to that. It's important. It's valuable. So I think after ingesting or taking psychedelics, I think it's important to be aware that the red peel is real. Here we are in Sydney, filmed in this city in 1999. Wait on, or was it 97? I think it was 97. I was here then. I was living here then. And yes, here we are in the city of the Matrix, the land of the lady in the red dress. And I think it's important to be aware that actually that metaphor is extraordinarily profound. I do know one ayahuasquero, mescalero, who would give people cactus and or ayahuasca and make them watch scenes from The Matrix. I think there's a lot in there. They've distilled a lot of stuff. Some of you might not know, but the Wachowski brothers, when asked where did the inspiration for The Matrix come from, they said designer drugs. But I think DMT was a very big influence on them. But I do think the red pill is real, and I do meet some people who don't know or don't quite understand that there is actually a red pill, and suddenly, maybe they didn't understand or they didn't read the instructions on the packet properly. But, I think it's important to be aware that, hey, there is a red pill, and that, yes, it is hard to see reality that way. It's the world of the real is difficult to deal with, because what everyone is suppressing and repressing and not wanting to look at, you can suddenly see it. And that's hard work. It's not the easier path, but at least it's the real path. At least it's real, rather than these superficial, silly, unreal lives that people are living all around us. You know, I have friends here organising a speaking tour, and the other speakers are like, what is wrong with these people here in this city? You know, they're like, you know, two-dimensional cardboard cutouts. It's quite scary sometimes, the unreality. But I think it's important, you know, again, it's not always easy to leave the matrix. But when the red pill hits you, it hits you hard, and there's no way back. It's a bit like a fish trap. You know, the fish goes into the trap, and then it's sort of, the trap narrows down, and then it's in here and it can't go back out. It's a little bit like that, though. Once you know what the truth is, once your body knows what the truth is, once you know what a world that is not ruled by you know, ego, false desires, and the manipulation of the mind is like, you can't easily go back to a world which is not going to give you any essential nutrition, where actually it's actually meaningless garbage that is not giving you any nutrition. And also, I think when you do take the red pill, it's not that perhaps for everyone, suddenly you're going to be able to find a lot of meaningful nutrition right away. It can be just a really hard slog for a long time. And depending on the individual, there's just so much stuff that the individual must, not must, but that innately it's up to them to have a look at themselves and see what it is that is really preventing them from being in contact with the meaningful. And I think that there's a certain, I think that life is asking us to be and do. Life is directing us in many respects, and I think that there are many callings implicit just in being alive. And, you know, there are many potentials to be fulfilled. And I found that sometimes when you begin to fulfill these potentials, you get called to do things that are very out of the ordinary, and you get called to do things, and it's almost like there's an obligation or responsibility to life to fulfill certain obligations in consciousness. And I'm not saying I necessarily understand that too much. I think I have a very slim understanding of this topic, but it's something I have become aware of, that it seems that we are called, that we are asked, that when we develop certain faculties, when we do have a certain capacity that maybe is quite specialized, or specialized in the people around us, that we may be asked or called to act and be and do certain things and say certain things. And I think that there is a certain kind of reward, there is a certain kind of fulfillment or satisfaction that comes from that. And perhaps there maybe if that calling is not heeded, that life can be difficult. It's quite funny, an example just sprung into my mind. Here we are in Redfern, and years ago I went to a workshop with an Aboriginal lady called Lorraine Murphy-Williams, who she was an elder, Aboriginal elder, who I went to one of her workshops once, and she really was quite a mystic lady. I arrived with my friend about 15 minutes before at the venue, and all these crows circled around and squawked. Like, there's a few hundred of these crows, and we're just like, what the hell is going on here? And then, Lorraine arrives, and just half a dozen people arrives. She was not, this is around Byron Bay, 1999. She wasn't taken that seriously by many people. She was considered a bit crazy, and she was extremely eccentric, but I think she was onto it. She did have a lot to share. And she arrived, and half an hour into the workshop, one crow comes over and circles around. There's a couple of them, and they're circling around, squawking. And Lorraine says to them, "What are you guys doing here? You're supposed to be here earlier cleaning up the energy to this place, you stupid bastards!" And they're saying, "No, Lorraine, we were here earlier. So that she just comes to mind, and her story was that she didn't want to teach white people. She said that the spirits pestered her, that she was forced into it. She said, no, I think she actually was living in Redfern at the time. She didn't want anything to do with white people, but she said the spirits pestered her, made her life so hard until she was forced to start doing workshops and work on reconciling and sharing information with white Australians. So I think it can be a tricky thing being in this world where reality is determined for you, and our education system will often slot you into a certain category, and you're supposed to fulfill a certain amount of functions. And at the end of it, your most valuable asset, your very time, is evaporated to nothing, and you don't have any time to live or explore or be. And I think it's very tricky. And that perhaps the richest among us are those who do have that opportunity to explore, create, and be. This work with psychedelics, simply being an aware human being, it can take a lot of time. Like I was saying, this integration phase, often it just takes time. Just being in nature, just allowing oneself to be, just allowing oneself to process, and trusting that the intelligence will do the job, that your own intelligence will do the job. There's nothing necessarily within the programming of the times that stresses any kind of trust or value in accepting or understanding that there is any intelligence at all within the organism or the mind. It's a very skeptical, doubtful, mistrusting programming that we're coming from. But I think, by looking hard and contemplating reality and why things may not be exactly as we want them to be, or we think they should be, or the different characteristics of reality that can be hard and tricky and painful and messy and uncomfortable, and all that I think that even though not all of it can necessarily be made sense of, some of it can be, and you can actually in one's own life get a grip as to the way things are, not just in one's own life, but in the world. And I think when taking psychedelic, psychoactive plants, it's often that some people do engage not just in their own suffering, but engage in a space of suffering that is collective and universal. And this is perhaps a kind of initiation that I've seen people enter into. They might be going along swimmingly after, 54 ayahuasca sessions, and suddenly it's like, bang. It's like, what was that? That was something I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy. And I would often see it, or most probably see it, as the collective suffering of humanity. So what I've found, or in talking to people who have this experience, is, for one thing, A, it's very sobering. And B, it makes you really think about things a lot. And it makes you think to yourself, I want to do what I can to reduce that suffering. I want to do what I can so that's not there. And that's something that comes as a natural impulse, I think. And that is, though it might not be all there is to life, I think that where things are now and how life is now, I do think it's a noble calling to really do what you can to reduce suffering in humanity. And humanity and even creation, I've been thinking recently, it's incredibly large, it's fantastically large, it's infinite. You can't really measure how big it is. But paradoxically, there's something incredibly intimate and close and small and nearby about reality, even though it's fantastically large. And you see this in the world. Even though the world is so large and so big, and there's 7 billion humans, it's an incredibly intimate place. The synchronicities that can occur in the world between humans, the 7 degrees of separation, we actually live in a very small world and a very big world at the same time. So yeah, everything that we do has an impact. It's important not to be a selfish rat and live in reality, which is the reality of connected consciousness. And that is the reality. And that is where you'll find, I think, the real fulfillment, the real reward systems, the real feedback mechanisms, the real sense of satisfaction, and the real sense of like, okay, now I'm experiencing something meaningful. So, where is it all going? Where is humanity going? What is happening? What is evolution doing? Is this evolution? Is this devolution? Devolution? I've been contemplating this for a long time. I'm writing a book about what I understand about the future of humanity, and I don't know how people are going to respond to it. I think a lot of people aren't going to like it. I think, I think if you're looking at the collective nature of humanity and our evolution and future, I think there's a lot of hard truths to look at there. There's a lot of things that are not easy to accept, and not easy to understand. But the way that I see it, and the way that I try and orientate my life, is that if I was living in a utopia, in a way, maybe not if I was living in a utopia, but a more ideal society, perhaps. How can I say it? I think it's important to act in such a way that that creates results. I think that, and everyone can create results. It's so easy to plant lettuces. It's so easy to plant broccoli. It's so simple to plant a tree. I think that everyone can create results that are meaningful. It's not out of anyone's touch. It's whether they choose to see the necessity and take the time to see the value in what's significant in life. And I think, I suppose, in my own life, I try and act in such a way whereby I'm actually trying to give something to the world, and that in the giving you get back. You give value, you get back value. It's pretty simple stuff, really, I think. And it's as simple as that. It doesn't need to be more complex than that. The more value you give, the more value you get back. I think it's extraordinarily simple stuff. And, that's what the human mind does. It complexifies everything. It makes things, it obscures the simple truth. At the end of the day, I think a lot of actually being aware and being conscious is about seeing the mechanisms of the mind, seeing the mechanisms of the ego, seeing how they create undesirable factors that obscure the fulfillment and the flowering. And I think that, okay, these tools are very powerful. The psychoactive plants are very powerful. They are powerful tools. And there is that potential for that healing to occur, that awakening, that activation, that alignment to occur. And the plants are doing this. Even on a physical level, they're doing this. But I come to think that the most powerful healing, the most powerful alignment is through humans, and that through other human beings that we can really find the perhaps the reflection of what we are, and through other people and through allowing and receiving and giving with other people, that even though it can be the most work, it can also be the most fruit come from that. That, at the end of the day, I don't like talking about the L word so much. I think it's become a bit redundant. But at the end of the day, all the religions and the poets and philosophers say the same thing. And that it's through other human beings that reality can become, and that truth can become, that beingness can become, that life is manifested, that life is fulfilled, that life is brought to bear, that life is made meaningful. But I do think that the second most powerful thing that I know is psychoactive plants. And yeah, so that's end of part one. So we can have some questions, but I'm just going to check my camera here, see how that's going.
Break or restricted or something? 5 minutes?
No, I'm okay. I'm good.
Maybe pass the mic around.
Is this one working? Do you think? Hello. Yep, that one's working. Hello. Yep. Maybe that one's to hand.
I don't know if this might be a bit of a long-winded question. It's sort of like more abstract. It might be sort of more relevant to the, I guess, differences in sort of perspective and experience. I guess in the DMT world or the Ayahuasca world. In my personal experience with like the psychedelics and DMT, I personally have never really seen or engaged with like entities or beings or things like that, other than what I would perceive as just an extension of myself in terms of like a physical sort of like a template of like a human sort of humanoid shape. And I'm intrigued on, I guess, your perspective and experience when it comes to like beings and things like that, whether they actually are fantasy, whether they are like archetypes of, I guess, gods or goddesses, or whether it is actually like another form of you telling yourself things about yourself, which is like everyone anyway.
Well, this is one of these things that can you hear me? Okay. Yep. This is one of these things that has been a consistent theme in the interviews I've been conducting, and a lot of people have been saying the same thing, that at the end of the day, what's being communicated is you are, at the end of the day, communicating with, maybe it's not your own mind, but it's the greater mind which is connected to you. And, if you want to go into the sort of the non-dual perspective, which you say, oh, it's all one consciousness. It's all one consciousness communicating with itself anyway. But what you'll find is these beings will come to you and say, we are you. We are you. But they're not. They don't look like you. I mean, you only have to read the reports of thousands of people who smoke DMT. It's all online. There's many of these reports to realize the extent and breadth of a novelty and alienness of all these forms that people experience. But not just the forms that people experience, but how deeply they've been touched by those experiences. And I think this is the thing that a lot of, actually, I would say there's not that many people in the psychedelic world who say, oh, it's just a projection of the mind or consciousness. I've known very, very few. I don't know everyone in the psychedelic world, but I've met a lot of people. And the ones who are really serious about it, who've done it seriously or semi-seriously, there's just a handful of people who actually think that. Say people have been doing it 5 years, 10 years plus, something like that. There's just a handful of people who have that perspective that, oh, it's, coming from the mind or the brain or consciousness. This is one thing I didn't quite address in my talk because it's something I do talk about a lot, and I kind of glossed over it a little bit. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that it's useful to recognize that life exists in many different shapes and forms, in many different dimensions, that life is an infinite ecology. And I think that that realization can give people a great sense of meaning, that they're part of something much, 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 much greater, much, 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 much bigger than what's going on here. This is just one little part of it, you know. And that just makes sense to me. And when you have the many, 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 many experiences, there's no question, there's no doubt, there's no room for that.
Cool. I guess something to sort of follow on from that, because I guess in my experience, I sort of believe those kinds of things, those kinds of entities exist anyway on some sort of like other fifth, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh dimensional reality anyway. But more as, I guess, I don't know, maybe it's just my own personal experience, or like a couple of people that I talk to. Because I guess when I go to the state, I try to do something more with it, and I try to sort of retain most of my like personality in there to a certain extent, so that I can actually almost like physically create. So it's like trying to like interact with humans to actually like, I guess, play with the energy that's in that space. Where like I guess that borderline sort of breakthrough level, or however it would be described by some people, in terms of when reality breaks down so much that you're not even really as present in your physical body. So I guess it's sort of before that state, sort of playing with that really heightened state of awareness and being, and then seeing everything as you, but still seeing like the simplified form, the reality, like all physical matter sort of takes shape as it sort of gets closer to like that oversimplification. I'm not really sure where I was going with that.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people who don't really see beings, you know. It's not everyone sees these beings. And, recently I've been more, again, I was talking about obligation or responsibility, and, having an awareness, a deeper awareness of beings that are causing, that are predators, that are actually malevolent beings. And I didn't necessarily call that into my life. It just sort of happened. It's just an awareness that happens. And I think that as more and more people say, more and more people drink ayahuasca, for example, which is becoming more and more prevalent in the world, in the Western world especially, people are actually, it's being revealed that there are these parasites all around us all the time, and it's a big problem. That these parasites, which are not cannot be easily ascertained with physical senses or measured easily, that they really are causing humanity a great deal of strife, a great deal of difficulty. So, I think that, say I was talking about the red pill, there's another little aspect of it. And I think that in many respects, having that awareness has made my life a hell of a lot harder, but a lot easier in a strange way as well, because I don't feel influenced by these beings. Okay, I have to fight them all the time, pretty much, but I'm not affected by them. So, whereas I see other people may struggle at times to not be influenced by such beings. And it's not that I would see that their purpose is to possess people, but influence the mind, influence the emotions, and thereby control us.
So from that, would you say that Gnosticism is a helpful origin reconciling?
I think I personally believe the Gnostics were taking some sort of acacia in Syrian Rue, and they got this access or insight into reality. But I personally feel that having I think it's quite a fearful version of reality. I think that the way I choose to accept it now is the nature of these beings. I mean, I don't see them as something to be feared. I see them as provocative players in the game. You know, I see them as aspects in the game which are stimulating, just like the lions and the predators in the African landscape create that sense of drama and that sense of that actually, and they're the ones taking out the weaker, you know, the weaker animals as well. I think what's happening on Earth now is very confusing. It's really hard to get your head around, but I do think that what's happening now is out of balance. I think that what we're experiencing is a lack of human beings really in their right mind. What we're experiencing is a lot of human beings who are just not in their right mind at all. They don't have any right mind. And there's a lot of people who see me as not in their right mind. Well, you know, you can see that people who are not in their right mind often, and they're the majority, you know, they're not necessarily going to go, oh yeah, he's in his right mind. Let's go to his talk. You know, they're more likely to say, no, he's crazy. We're saying, we're the majority, because that's how the herd thinks. That's the ego, you know. But yeah, I personally do feel I'm in my right mind because I have become aware of what was influencing me and learned how to defend myself from it. But again, it's like, it's not constant warfare, but it's pretty much consistent.
What are your thoughts on kind of the emerging trend of kind of mainstreaming psychedelics in the world? And do you have any opinions about it?
The mainstreaming.
Yeah, the mainstreaming. The perceived kind of mainstreaming of psychedelics.
Yeah, I think it's disconcerting to me in many respects because there's no mention that, wait on, you take this and you might be, you know, processing a lot of information. You might not be. It's almost like it's a diluting, you know. It's that remedial consciousness. Oh, this will fix that. Take that pill. It makes me uncomfortable because it's not necessarily about asking these questions and about, you know, doing work on oneself and manifesting, you know, the truth of consciousness. So it's a little bit worrying, I think, that you know, the religion of the times, which is you know, some sort of systematic structural belief system whereby science is the defining element which tells us whether something true is not, which is called scientism, is actually considered to be the most valid way of knowing anything and the most valid way of understanding anything. Whereas my view is the most valid way of understanding anything or knowing anything is to, you know, sit in front of it and contemplate it and experience it. And so, yeah, it's concerning, I think, because there's so much complexity in the human mind. You know, there's so many different factors we need to be aware of and take care of. And, you know, when I read these articles saying, oh, magic mushrooms will cure this and do that, it's a little bit like, wait on, this is a whole can of worms. And again, we need to be prepared, have a solid foundation and support people who go into this and realize that, hey, this just ain't fooling around. Even though these psychedelics are extremely powerful, I think they do require they do require a lot more of us than, oh, just take magic mushrooms and I cured my depression. Woohoo! There's so many perceptual mechanisms that can be awakened, and we're living at a time where a lot of people are not prepared to face and deal with what they're experiencing. They don't have any context for what they're experiencing. They don't know what they're experiencing. Make default. They're just like, oh, I'm just having a hallucination. Oh, it's just a trip. It will pass. Where it actually what they're experiencing might be something not really helpful or actually harmful to them on different levels. So yeah, I mean, this is the thing. Psychedelics will often open you up to these levels of reality whereby various entities and beings do find it easier to interact with you because you're tuning more into their radio station, which is the etheric field. You're tuning more into the channel they live, which is it can be really scary and terrifying. And there's something I feel there's something in it which feels like there's a lack of questioning. There's a lack of people stepping out and really coming to terms with the phenomena on its own terms. The predominant way of understanding phenomena is, okay, well, does the government sanction that? Does this authority or that authority say that it's okay? It's not. I don't see that it's really about authority or power, or who says what is which. But like I said, I think what's more important is asking the right questions, being prepared, having a foundation to engage, and doing something useful with the resulting states. And hopefully exploring, understanding the new. It's like I say in my book, it's like sometimes you talk to these people who have these very rigid belief systems whereby that reality circa 2018, what science understands about reality, is the standard benchmark for what reality is. And when you take psychedelics, you can understand that reality is so much bigger and vaster and bigger than you can really conceive of, and that's the whole friggin' point. It's like Ned Flanders. That actually, I think, denying that and saying, no, it's not bigger, it's not more expanded, it's not greater, it's smaller, it's to be reduced, it's just what we see it as, what we can see with a measure, that's just bullshit.
So going with the risks you point out of psychedelic renaissance, would you say that a therapeutic model is a better pathway to decriminalisation, or a full, all-out cognitive liberty model in which everyone is, complete sovereignty to do with their mind what they choose to?
I think there's a sort of halfway. There's a halfway model that I think could work. I actually wrote an article for the blog Wake Up World, which is like huge readership, and I said in that article, how could we utilize psychedelics in a sane world? And I think in a sane world, you would be able to go to a safe space, and which would be something like a park or a zoo, where maybe it's open 24/7, that there's appropriate food there, appropriate tools, float tanks and binaural beats, and there's little ponies you can pet, and like a water slide, and art everywhere, and cool music. And you could go there and know that you're safe and that you can explore this material, explore yourself, you're going to be looked after, and that it's all going to be okay. You know, that's my viewpoint of what would be like a vision of a context that could work. And that could be set up in Vanuatu tomorrow, because psychedelics are not illegal in Vanuatu. They did not sign the 1971 Convention on Psychotropic and on Substances.
Julian, so ayahuasca has become like fairly entrenched and in some ways pop psychological phenomenon. There's a lot of different ways that ayahuasca has come into our culture, I suppose. What do you feel is the difference with acacia and it being almost like some kind of open playing field in Australia? How do we preserve that open playing field, and how do we step forward into the future for really developing acacia, despite the fact that obviously it's been used in the past by various different cultures? How do we use it in a way that is not going to be contaminated in a lot of the ways in which the ayahuasca culture has been?
You know what? This is really hard. This is really hard. I found a plant recently in Asia that is, it's a plant that is a new psychoactive plant that has not been understood to be orally psychoactive by anyone as far as I know. I'm sure there's some people who might have stumbled across it but didn't tell anyone. But it's very powerful. It's like ayahuasca, it's like a boga. And I'm asking myself now, okay, I've kind of let the cat out of the bag with the identity of this plant. You know, what am I going to do? Set up some, no one can control these plants. I can't determine where it goes, who's going to take it, who's going to misuse it, who's going to abuse it, you know. It's like I came up with a smoking blend years ago with DMT and ayahuasca in it. And like I was saying before, it's like, okay, you know, life calls you. There's an obligation. I couldn't just go, oh, you know, share it with a few mates and leave it at that. That wasn't going to happen. That was not a reality that was even possible at that time. I wasn't exactly forced at gunpoint, but it sort of felt a bit like it at the time to, you know, try and allow people to understand this magic and use it appropriately, but it was not easy. In terms of this new plant, you know, I sort of think that you've just got to let it go out there, and the right people will use it, and then maybe the wrong people will use it in ways that are not conducive. One cannot control these things. And I think with acacia, it's, you know, I think that, yeah, we can't necessarily control or determine in this highly unregulated system. And I don't necessarily think that a regulated system would be that great either. You know, it's like, hey, these things grow in the ground. Everyone can grow them. I think the best thing we can do, if you can grow them, grow the right species and grow as many of them as you can, you know, because most likely in the coming years, people are going to want to access them, and there's a limited amount in the wild. So I've been saying this for 15 years, and yeah, I reckon in the last few years people have been getting it and getting out there, growing them, the right species, especially probably Acacia courtii is the one that grows the best and grows everywhere and has like biggest amount of DMT in the phyllodes that can be collected. So I think that, yeah, it's really tricky. Say ayahuasca, yeah, so many people have co-opted ayahuasca in so many different ways, you know. I even hear of Satanists using ayahuasca. Just think of how ayahuasca is used in the jungle, ripping off all those tourists and all the dark sorcerers and stuff, you know. So I think that possibly we can't really determine or control these things. We can just do the best we can to use these things in the right way. And the issue is, once you start standing up and doing that, sometimes the bad guys are really going to come down on you, as it were, you know. And that's why that's a lot of the problem with this world. The good guys are not standing up and doing it because they're scared of the bad guys, you know. Perhaps that, you know, I see that often. All the people who are standing up and doing it are standing up and doing it for the wrong reasons. They're not actually doing it for the right reasons. So I think that's a really big problem in our world, that you know, that people, there's a lack of people really standing up and then, you know, weathering the storm. So yeah, there's no getting away from the storm.
So I think everyone's introduction to psychedelics is more or less different, but one thing in common is that there wasn't a doctor of psychedelics or a shaman there at the time. Having experienced psychedelics for 10 years or more with your Ayahuasca experiences, I find a lot of my friends come to me for advice. So I'm in a situation where, as a student, I've become a little bit like a teacher, and I just want to know what your advice is for people like us to how to share our experiences of psychedelics with our friends who take that interest.
Did you say to have a shared experience with people?
No, just how to give advice. What is the right advice?
Oh, right. Okay.
And has had a lot of experience. How do we share that?
Well, I think YouTube is where it's at now. Like, YouTube should be the new religion. Probably is the new religion. Everything's there. Everyone gets all their advice from there. You know, right now this is going to go on YouTube. I mean, I think that, I think that it's a matter of, maybe it's a matter of finding the right materials that you think people are going to be receptive to, that they can understand what it is they're dealing with. And I generally am not big into shoving books and giving people links and things. I generally think that people in an ideal world are self-sufficient and do their own research, you know. And I think that if people are not capable of doing their research, I think it's like possibly borderline, maybe they're not ready, you know. So I think there's something, what's the word, a little bit forced about trying to teach people or show people how things are. But I certainly think that if people have questions, and that if people really want to understand, I mean, they can just talk to you and you can try and explain it to them. And yeah, I think people often downplay their own understanding, their own wisdom. So yeah, I just think it's just a matter of communicating, really, you know. I don't think it's there's anything much more fancy you need to do with people. Just communicate about your own experiences, what's happened for you, what's worked for you, what hasn't worked. You know, see what they say that you can resonate with. Like, see if you can, you know, go back into your time when you were just starting out, and where you were at, how you saw the world. So perhaps that's part of it too.
Thank you.
foundation practices should be well established and experienced before they go anywhere near 5-MeO DMT?
I think 5-MeO DMT is an interesting one. I probably think you can spring 5-MeO DMT onto anyone and they'll have the same experience. And it's like dying and then going back to the original, the original, some people say the word source or they say God. There's all these words, but it's like dying and going back to, what's there prior to all phenomena at all. It's just this absolute space. And I don't know if you need to prepare for that. I think the 5-MeO DMT is a little bit of a fad. I've done it. I've been doing it for over a decade and done a fair amount of it. And I think once you get that download, and I've been to the space that 5-MeO can give you just with NMDMT as well. You can get it with any psychedelic. But 5-MeO will take you into that space. But once you've been there once, twice, a few times, you don't need to keep going back there. It's the same place. And I was talking with James Orrock recently, who's written the book Tryptamine Palace. And he's one of the leading experts in 5-MeO DMT. And he says when he does it with his friends, he's terrified. And after he does it, he says, guys, I probably shouldn't do this. I don't know what I'm doing. So I think, and he says it always takes him back to the same place. And I said, if it's the same place, why do you keep doing it? And he says, what did he say? I can't remember. That it's certainly not boring. It's not same. It's a very rich, deep, powerful experience. But I believe that space is a priori state of consciousness. It's actually already there. So we can already tap into it. So I don't necessarily see the value of continuing to go there. It is a samadhi experience. It is the state that the mystics talk of that perhaps could be reached through other techniques. And is, in some religious or spiritual schools considered to be the goal, But once you've experienced that, it's like, you're back a chopping the wood and you're back carrying the water, So I think what I was wanting to talk about today is that, okay, beyond the carrying water and chopping wood, what is really worth doing? How can there be like a foundation to acting and being in the world that's meaningful in terms of an approach of being? Because I think that having the 5-MeO experience, and even if you were able to live in that state all the time, it doesn't make sense. It's like, okay, now what? Let's live this life. And I got some great footage of James Orrock just about to jump off Mount Mystic near Bright in his paraglider, saying, I'm paraphrasing, life is about enjoyment, like taking advantage of your human life and enjoying it. And I thought it's something so simple and many of us forget and get so wrapped up in the complexities.
Just along those lines, Julian, what do you see the relationship between DMT and embodiment? So physical practices that can help bring the DMT state back into everyday life?
Well, a friend of mine, James Skalkos, he wanted to provide some practices to people so they could prepare their physical body and their mind and their body to engage with the DMT state. And I think some of those practices, and there are many practices as well, that can lead to an endogenous DMT state. And a lot of people talk about these endo trips and having endogenous experiences. In my own experience, I'm not actually seeking anything like that at all. I got to a point where I'm like, whoa, let's turn on the brakes. Not let's turn on the accelerator, but whoa, some brakes is more useful here than accelerator. So I think that, back to your question, I think that in terms of what DMT can do for the body, I think it is a medicine for the body. I spoke to a very well-known lawyer a couple of days ago who said that DMT is like, it like gives you an erection for life. And like everything was erect, everything is at attention, And I think there's that level that I would see DMT as a neurotransmitter, and I completely disagree with David Nichols' view that it isn't, for example, and think he's totally wrong. And there's a lot of people who do think that it is a neurotransmitter. And I do believe that it allows transmission of information, that it facilitates the complexity of information to communicate and network and lock in. And that process, I think you can say if you've drunk an ayahuasca, or say you've taken acacia and Syrian rue, that state is one in which you're more connected. You're clearly more connected. You're able to look at everything from many different angles. You've got like an ability to process more information. So the things that you weren't able to understand about yourself, your life, what's going on for you, what's going on in the world, suddenly you can compute it and put it together. And I believe that's because of the ability to process more information, because more information is being transmitted by those neurotransmitters. So I think also the neurotransmitters just aren't happening in here. There's all these neurons in the body, in the gut, in the heart, in the nervous system. You can feel a lot of energy is not the right word. Consciousness is not the right word. You can feel, let's just say, a lot going on in the body. You can feel that there's a fullness there. There's that engorgement, that erectness. The body's at attention. It's inspired. Suddenly there's an infusion of life force. Enthusiasm. Very good. So James Skalkos is the one to talk to about that. He's got some really great raps.
There are some psychedelic drug scientists that at least give the public persona that they're hardcore materialist reductionists. Do you consider it safe for such a psychedelic drug scientist to experiment in other people's minds with DMT from that perspective?
What do you mean by experiment on other people's minds?
I was more thinking Robert Carhart Harris at Imperial College.
Right. I don't necessarily think of that. One thing that you said that makes sense to me is that you were talking about the public face as being, a hardcore, rational, scientific materialist, but as a public face, but being at Breaking Convention and talking to lots of people there, a lot of the people who may present that public face have a totally different dialogue going on with their friends and people they know in the community. It's a more open-ended dialogue. So it's very interesting that I think there's a strong, there's a lot of people who want to maintain this apparent, it's like this, it's like this quite rigid, pseudo-disciplinary, pseudo-disciplined, rigid viewpoint of scientism, which has the most credibility, it being the religion of the day. But on the other hand, hopefully psychedelics will make you question everything and look at everything in many different ways. Hopefully it will make you more into a fool who is stepping out of the known, jumping into the unknown, and exploring that with abandon and having that spacious receptivity rather than that sort of almost masculine, dogmatic pseudo-safety of residing in the known. And I think that's a very dangerous force in the world. That what we're saying, this is the dangerous religious fundamentalism is an example of that, And I think that people who want to maintain their descriptions of reality is the absolute truth. I think that's very dangerous. I think it's really important to deeply question and not necessarily maintain any ideological viewpoint. However, DMT is a neurotransmitter. Did you say a trial or child?
Trials, like the way that the medical fraternity and all the law, they want to have repeatable results, so they get out like a large-scale trial, and they sort of ignore things that they can't repeat, as opposed to an N=1 trial where it's relevant to the individual.
Yeah, it's interesting all these questions are coming up about psychedelic science. I mean, it's not my field or forte. One thing I would say that I have noticed is, hey, if psychedelic science is going to be psychedelic science, it must become psychedelic. And I'm not necessarily seeing that. It's all this, people trying to make the most conservative, tried and true experiments that are not really thinking out of the box and are not really exploring this new territory. And I think we're in really early days here in the primitive world of exploration. So I don't even really pay too much attention to the psychedelic science going on because it's relatively gobbledygook for me. I mean, if I want to understand what's going on, I just, like I said, I take the psychedelic and I listen and I hear and I see and I try and understand as much as I can. And in that understanding, there's a lot that you won't be able to, that I see, you won't be able to understand. There's so much that is just beyond conception and that your mind may not be able to grasp. But I think, you do the best you can to do that. So, in terms of psychedelic science questions, I'm not the best person to ask about clinical trials and except this is my observation of the scene at the moment and as I see it, and I think there's some rigid structures that might be preventing an evolution that's really consonant with the states themselves and relevant to the states themselves and really facilitating the true potentials, there's a lot of work to be done. You know, there's a lot of paradigms to be busted, for sure.
More questions?
Hey, Julian. With ayahuasca, traditionally there's a lot of master medicines in the jungle, things like utilising and ayahuasca, and brews can certainly be made, which includes several of these other medicines. Do you think that that we're losing something out by simply reverting back to a simplistic Syrian brew as the monoamine oxidase inhibitor and acacia itself? Is it a less rich experience from your perspective?
No, I think it's a valid tool in order to experience that plant consciousness and that state of consciousness. The Syrian ruin acacia is very transparent medicine, and it can really allow you to perhaps not be so involved in the realm of the body, in the purging and the nausea. It can be, you can walk around, it's a bit more, it can be quite cosmic, where the ayahuasca can be more earthy, bring you back to the body, bring you back to your own issues, whereas the Syrian ruin acacia can be a transparent medium. I think, people around this time are just starting to really grok the importance of admixture plants, and there are people now in Australia starting to teach and give dietas about certain plants. So that's starting to come through, which is really great. That people are, okay, what can we learn from, Bob Insana? What can we learn from, Chiricsanunga? What can we learn from Chuchuwasi? These are all powerful plants that people in the Amazon have found to be incredible healing plants. I have not fully explored the dieting process, but I regularly use admixture plants in ayahuasca, and they're fantastic because the admixture plants will activate the qualities of those plants, and you cannot, as far as I know, add the admixture plants to the Syrian rue and the acacia. You need the ayahuasca to activate these admixture plants. So the future that I can see is in somewhere like Australia, people will understand what our admixture plants are. What are the plants that we have here that people can diet with? What can we learn from the plants around us, not just these Amazonian plants, which are fantastic. But on the other hand, I'd say, we need to be aware. I've used Australian plants as admixture plants, and they were too powerful and out of control, and I was just, it's just too much. So, and they can radically affect your consciousness in ways you may not be prepared for. So even you put a few leaves or something in there, and the bruise just is imprinted in a way that's just, it's too radical. And I really think that one needs to be very careful about which admixture plants you use with ayahuasca. But in the future, I can see people writing books and online databases about each plant in Australia does when you use it with ayahuasca, or even just what it does. We don't even know what all these plants do. What's that?
What was the plant that was too radical?
I don't even know what it was. I only found one specimen of it. It just looks so cool. It had big leaves like this, and it looked like eucalyptus, but it was something totally different. And they were rainbow-coloured leaves. I only ever saw one specimen. They just put one of them in the brew. It's just too much. So, before that, I was like, let's put some, tamarind and berries and all this little bit of that, little bit of that. After that, I was like, I don't know what I'm dealing with here. This is someone else's life work. This is many people's life work. Just cataloging what all these plants do, say combined with ayahuasca. It's awesome. So, you know, it's very interesting. I think we're, that's good. I think we're...
What's in the future for you, Julian?
Well, I'm filming this doco. I'm going to interview about 50 or 60 people and put together this doco about psychedelics. And it's, you know, I've already said my bit. I've written a book. It's all in there, and I give these talks. But there's so much that people have to say, and it's really awesome to experience the wisdom of all these people. You know, some of them are elders, some of them are young people, some of them are famous people. You know, stepping out and saying, "Hey, I do this. This is awesome," and giving advice to people about how to go it properly. And so that's taking up pretty much all my time now. And then, like I was saying about this plant that I found, I don't know what that's going to require of me. I'm hoping just that someone else will just you know, start becoming the propagator. You know, I'm sure it needs to be grown. I know it needs to be distributed. I'm happy just to have found it, and I do believe it was the identity of Soma that was used in the Rig Vedas, because as far as I know, there's no other plant that is active. There's one other plant that I found in New Caledonia that is active when you take it as a tea, but this one has beta-carbolines, MO inhibitors, DMT, and 5-MeO. It's like, you can't beat that. You tell me, okay, so if there's another plant that Soma might be, what chemicals would it contain? Tell me. How could it be more interesting or stronger than that? So, but that's not the important part. The important part is, yes, it's very potent, very healing. I think it can help a lot of people. So, yeah, I'm hoping the Pineapple Foundation give me a few thousand Bitcoin and everything can take care of itself. But, yeah, no, I'm moving into making films. So this documentary that I'm making, I want to move more into making documentaries and creating film erotica. So creating erotic films that are not just mixed sexuality junk food, that actually are inspirational to people and educational and allow people to understand how sexuality can be much more sacred and intimate than it is now, especially with the lack of education in our society. Well, teenagers, all they learn about sex is from pornography. It's wrong. So maybe I'm sure there's a demand for the content which inspires people to understand that there's a lot more to sexuality than there's a lot more to it than our society says that there is. There's a lot of potentials, and that there's a spirituality in it. It doesn't have to be called tantra. It doesn't have to be religious. That there's spirituality in interacting and in understanding those potentials is extraordinarily powerful and very important. So that I feel that's a priority for me at the moment.